Hello, and welcome to Practicing with Purpose with teacher and author Dr. David Kish. This class is brought to you today by a partnership with Sacred Music Florida and the Florida Parent Educator Association Scholarship Foundation. Today, Dr. Kish will be discussing practice techniques from his book, Practicing with Purpose. Grab some paper and a pencil as we join the class that is already in session.
We're going to set some goals today. The first thing I want you to write down is a goal that you can accomplish today in your next practice session. When we hang up this call and you get ready to practice, what's one thing you can accomplish today? Like for me, it might be working on my D major scale, or it might be learning the first line of an etude. Something that I can do today. Okay, go ahead. I'll give you a minute. Okay, is anyone brave enough to share one of their goals? I won't, judge. Just curious if anybody's willing. Go ahead.
Sure.
Wait, that
I
has spelled
unmuted
download.
you. You want to share?
That has spelled unmuted.
Yes. You want to share?
Talk.
Go ahead, Logan.
Old Town Road.
He wants to learn in the last 2 pages. There's 6 pages.
Perfect. That's a big goal, and I love it. I love that you can practice 2 pages. That's awesome. Good for you. Anybody else want to share?
I will.
Go ahead. Is it Abby?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Adding vibrato on every note of my etude.
Wow. Okay, great. That's a really nice short-term goal as well. Okay, super. So keep that and just kind of circle it and say that's short-term. And now write something that you might be able to accomplish in the next week. We're going to call that our long-term goal, even though a week isn't really long-term. For now, just call that a long-term goal, okay? So something that you want to get done this week that might take 2 or 3 or 4 practice sessions. Okay, I need one person to share. Who wants to share their long-term goal?
I want to learn the next 2 pages of the piece I'm learning on the piano right now.
Okay, thank you, Maria. Yep, that would be a good long-term goal, something that you can accomplish over the next week. So it might be that you learn 2 or 3 lines today, you learn 2 or 3 lines tomorrow, you put those together. The next day you learn, the top of the next page or something like that. That's great. I love it. Okay, let's move forward. So keep those goals and keep that piece of paper with you. When I sat down to write this book, I ended up writing 50 different techniques for practicing. And I needed a way to organize them because I'd been saving these ideas for years and years. And I divided them into 3 different categories: philosophies, strategies, and tools. I wrote down about 10 philosophies. I wrote down 30 practice strategies in the book, and then another 10 different tools. And we don't have time today, and it would be boring to go through all 50 of them. If you get excited about it after today, you want to read it on your own, then by all means. But I'm going to look at a few of each of these so you can kind of keep the organization in your mind. We're going to start with philosophies, go to strategies, spend quite a bit of time there, and then go to tools. Okay, let's go to philosophies first. Next slide. So I've got 5 written down here, and I think the first one is one that sometimes we get confused about with motivation. I don't know about you, but sometimes just getting motivated to do my schoolwork or getting motivated to practice or getting motivated to go exercise or whatever, sometimes just I'm waiting for some like magic wand to say, okay, now I'm excited to go practice. Now I'm excited to go exercise. Now I'm excited to go do my math homework or something like that. And that magic wand never happens. It never, I don't know. I never get like excited to go do that sort of thing. And so I did a lot of research into what motivates people, what gets you excited. And the first thing that motivates you is a short-term, very small, achievable goal, something that you know you can get done today. Well, you've already done that. You've already written down something that you can accomplish today. And then you need a small little reward for completing the task. And so, what might be a little reward if you do what you were supposed to do, like that short term goal that you wrote down, like learn the last 2 pages of a song or work on your scale? What might be a little reward you could give yourself? Any ideas?
Well, David, I have an idea.
Okay, go
Maybe
ahead.
we're here in Florida. Maybe you ride your bike down to the beach. Maybe you go outside, do something, something where you're up and you're active and you're getting out, maybe.
Yeah, I love it. And so, for me, getting outside is like a beautiful thing. Go shoot basketball for 15 minutes or go to the beach or
Mm.
I like to use cookies. I'm a big fan of chocolate chip cookies. My daughter makes great cookies. And so if I have a good practice, I might, sneak one chocolate chip cookie. People are motivated by different things. The point I'm trying to make to you is you need something small that you can do today, and then you need a little reward for doing that. And over time, that builds your motivation for practicing. Okay, the next thing is time is the enemy and progress is the goal. Lots and lots and lots of music teachers for years and years and years have been saying you need to practice 30 minutes today or 20 minutes today. Or sometimes I've even, in my band program, I gave out like practice cards and students had to fill out their time and submit. And what I realized and what I've learned in my research is that time isn't so important. What's more important is that you're making progress. And so if your goal today is to learn the D major scale, that might take 10 minutes. It might take 30 minutes. It might take 2 minutes. That's not a real measurement of practice. Music majors come up to say, "Hey, Dr. Kish, I practiced 2 hours today." And I say, "Okay, what got better?" Because to me, practicing for 2 hours is nice, but it should be the way in which you use that time. And so if it takes you 10 minutes to practice and get what you need to get done, that short-term goal, then that's all you need to do for today. And you move to the next thing. So time is kind of an enemy to some extent. Okay, next thing, matter over mind. I know when I practice basketball and I'm standing at the free throw line and I make, I shoot the first ball and maybe I make it and I go, okay, that's good. And then I shoot again and I miss. And then I shoot again and I make it. I say, okay, I've got this, right? 2 out of the 3, I'm good. Well, if we do that in music, if we're learning the D major scale and the first time we do it kind of right, and the second time we do it with maybe one mistake, and then we do it again the third time and we do it kind of right, our body now has 2 different ways to play the D scale. We can play it the right way, or we can play it with one mistake. And our mind goes, okay, 2 out of 3, I got this, I'm good. But your body needs lots of repetition. And so for your body to learn the D major scale, not your mind, for your body to learn the D major scale, you've got to do it over and over and over. LeBron James is probably right now shooting free throws. He's just shooting over and over and over and over again because his body needs that repetition. Even though his mind knows how to do it, the body needs the repetition. So I know with my own children, they'll say, well, I already know how to do this. And it's like, you're right. You do. Your mind does know how to do this, but your body needs more repetition. So go practice. Okay. Next thing is working the plan. We're going to spend a little bit more time about working the plan later, but I was surprised to learn that the highest performers in the world of music and in sports in particular, they have 2 things in common, and that's it, just 2 things. One, they're working with an expert coach, a teacher, a private teacher, a music teacher. And number 2, that teacher is making a plan for them. Go do this on Monday, do this on Tuesday, do this on Wednesday. And then the athlete or the musician, their job is to just go execute the plan. And that's where music it has a little bit of a problem, because our teachers are experts and they say, okay, you need to do this, this, and this, now go practice. And there's no real plan. There's no workout plan. There's no practice plan that they give us. And so we have to come up with it on our own. And that's not what makes experts often in the field, because learning on your own takes a long, long time.
Yeah.
And then finally, habits. Good habits, we all have them. We have good habits, we have bad habits, and practicing needs to be a good habit. And I won't go into all the details on developing habits, but if you use your time effectively and you start to use some of the strategies I'm going to give you here in a minute, you'll develop some really good practice habits. Okay, any questions so far? Before we go on, I don't want to, everybody's feeling good?
It's great. Great.
Great.
Well, I have a question.
Go ahead.
Am I on here?
Mhm.
So my son here has a teacher, and I want to not feel discouraged about that. He has a great teacher. What could I ask her to help us in terms of making him a plan? Like, how do I execute that part with his teacher?
Yeah, that's a great idea. And you can blame it on me and say, I went to this practice thing and this guy said that, it would be really helpful if we had like a schedule, a plan, like what should we do on Monday? What should we do on Tuesday? What should we do on Wednesday? And see if they can come up with a practice plan. And I'll give you some examples here at the end of the session as well. And then after a couple weeks of the teacher developing the plan, then you can start making it yourself.
Actually, she does do that. So if she doesn't just send us home and say practice, she has
Good.
like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. These are the things to work on. So that's what you're referring to.
Yes. And then you
Cool.
would break those down and say, here's number one. I'm going to do number one on Monday and Tuesday. Maybe I need to reinforce it Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, that kind of thing.
Okay.
And then you just keep working on the list and get as far as you can. Hopefully it gets all done. Good question. Any others? All right, let's keep going then. And go ahead.
Here?
Nobody?
Uh-oh. Where did everyone go?
I can
What
see
happened?
everybody.
I lost everyone there for a while.
I'm good.
We're still here.
We're
Yep.
still here. Okay. It didn't like me sharing, but I'll give it another
All
try.
right.
If we get kicked off, just come right back on. Okay. It didn't like the sharing. Okay, here we go. Are we there?
Yep.
Is everyone here?
Looks good.
Okay. Okay.
All right, let's head to the next slide, please.
Okay.
You can
Is
keep
this
going
the
down.
one?
Nope, keep
No,
going down.
I'm sorry.
Yep, right there. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Back up one. Right there. Strategies.
go.
Thank you. You're doing a great job, Allison. Okay.
I don't
So
know.
here's some strategies. I picked some of my favorites out of the 30 practice strategies, and I put my favorite at the top, and it's by far, without a doubt, the hardest one for all of us to do. And I call it slower is faster. We all want to go faster. We all want to get the job done as quickly as we can. We all want to, get to the finish line first. And in music, it's the exact opposite that is more efficient. And if you start learning your piece slowly, so slowly that you can't make a mistake, you will actually learn it faster than if you kind of just, slap through it, make a few mistakes, and then have to go back and fix all of those things. So for me, I love using a metronome, and I'm going to show you that in a minute how I use that. But the hardest thing, and it's hard for myself, it's hard for my own children. I'm sure it's going to be a little bit challenging for you too, but to go so slow those first couple of times for that first week that you're learning, that you can't make a mistake. Can you imagine learning something and not making a mistake the first time? It's hard to believe, but you don't want to give your body and your mind multiple ways to get to get the right answer. Honestly, you all know how to get to the grocery store, right? I mean, if you could walk to the grocery store, you could ride your bike to the grocery store, you could ask your parent to drive you to the grocery store. There's like 3 different ways to get to the grocery store. None of them are right and wrong. Music's a little bit different. You only have one way to get to the grocery store. There's only one way to play it. You don't want to give your mind 3 different ways to play the D major scale. And so if you just do it one way slowly, you'll learn it faster over time. Chunk it is also one of my favorites, where we don't try to learn the entire page all at once. We just learn a line, or we learn a few measures, and we work them over and over very slowly. Again, you think to yourself, well, I've got to get through this whole page because I told myself I've got to get through this page today. And you have to just take a deep breath and say, slower is faster. I'm going to learn these 2 measures today, and then I'm going to learn another line or 2, and a little bit at a time. If you chunk it, that's a really good way to learn. One of my favorite techniques, and this dates me a little bit, because when I was teaching middle school, everybody watched TV. Now I know you watch YouTube and lots of other things maybe, but I love to practice during commercials. During a regular television show of 60 minutes, you're going to have about 20 minutes worth of practice time. And as soon as that commercial comes on, run over and play the D major scale, or work on a couple measures, play it 3 times, and then come back and finish watching your show. That's a nice way to have a little short-term goal as well, as a reward. You know, I'm going to play my scales during all the commercial breaks or things like that. Supervised practice. I think this is kind of fun. I don't know if you've ever watched your teacher practice, but it would be fun to watch your teacher practice sometime. And I think it would be fun for your teacher to watch you practice sometime and give you tips on practicing. And then finally, mistakes happen. There was a really good study that was done at the University of Texas, and they looked at piano players and sort of amateur piano players, people that just enjoy playing for fun, college music majors that were studying piano, and then professional piano players. And basically the only difference between those 3 people, those 3 groups of people, is what they did when they had a mistake, because mistakes are going to happen when we're playing. The professional piano players, when they reached a mistake, they stopped immediately as soon as that mistake happened. And then they worked that little section over and over and over and over and over again so that the mistake could never happen again. And college music majors and amateur piano players didn't do that. They would often hit a mistake and just keep going. Or they might go back and rehearse it once or twice to make sure the mistake didn't happen, and then they would keep going. And professional pianists, the really high level performers, they worked it over and over and over and over again so that a mistake would never happen again, which is really kind of interesting. Okay, any questions so far?
Nope.
Awesome. Okay, then let's keep going so I can stay on time here. This is one of my favorite strategies, rhythmic variation. If you're playing an instrument or singing, this is kind of fun. It's a little bit harder to do with piano, but it's possible. The top line is the original, and then you can see I've changed the rhythm. I've varied it from triplets to 8th to 16th. Then I've changed it again the 3rd time, 2/16 and an 1/8. It's just another way to practice and keep things kind of interesting and fun. And for some people that will work great. Let's try one more here. Next slide. This is one of my favorites. And on the slideshow, when it actually works, you can see these things move around. But basically the idea of puzzle pieces is that you take your etude and make a copy of it because you don't want to ruin the original. And then you take your scissors and you cut it all up into a line or a couple measures, usually where there's a phrase marking, you can cut it up, and you make a bunch of puzzle pieces. And today you're going to practice 2 of the puzzle pieces, and tomorrow you're going to practice 2 more. And you really don't know how they all fit together. You're just going to work on a little puzzle piece here and a puzzle piece here and a puzzle piece here. And then maybe after 2 or 3 days, you start to put the pieces together and work on, 2 or 3 lines at a time. It's really a fun way to trick yourself into practicing. And I like, cutting up my music. It's kind of, it feels good. And then it's really fun to go back and try to put it together and practice a line or a phrase at a time. So I really
like
think
that.
puzzle pieces is fun. Yep. Okay.
I
Next
like
one.
that.
This is the last strategy that I want to talk with you about, and it's called the stair stepper. And I had music majors that were struggling playing their major scales. I don't know about you all, but anyone else have that trouble sometimes working on scales? And at my school, they have a jury, they have a test, if you will, at the end of each semester, and they have to have their major scales at a certain speed, like 120 to the 8th note or 160 or whatever it is. And my students, that's a little intimidating at the beginning of a semester, and it's sometimes frustrating for them to not be able to hit the speed. And so in May, before we were going off into summer break, I said, okay, anybody that wants to work on their major scales this summer, come and see the scale doctor. I called myself the scale doctor because I was going to fix their major scales. And I gave them a little test in May, and you can see this was in 2010, and this was for an oboe player. And she was really struggling with her major scales. And in the first line, you can see 80 all the way across the top. That's where she could play the tempo that she could play all of her major scales accurately. And she didn't make a mistake when we went 80. She could play them all at 80. I said, okay, every day you're just going to play all 12 major scales at 80 and don't make a mistake. She said, okay, I can already do that. I was like, great. Then you could see the next week, May 24th, then she went how fast?
She
84.
upped it by 4 beats.
Right. She went 84. And she couldn't move to the next tempo until all of those were correct. And she had to play them accurately. And then the next week was 88, 92. And you can see by the end of the summer, how fast was she going on her major scales?
Oh, she's going 132.
132. And so in a very short summer, she made massive progress. She went from 80 beats per minute to 132, and it was all accurate playing, not, making mistakes along the way, because she was reinforcing it at a good, steady tempo, and she was consistent. And so I had 12 students that enrolled in this. 11 of them were successful. They reached their goal by the end of the summer, and 1 student needed an extra week. That student went on vacation and skipped a week and didn't make any progress. Isn't that terrible? I'm just kidding. And needed an extra week, and then they were all successful in reaching those goals. So I really like that stair stepper approach.
Do you find, Dr. Kish, that the small amount that they're moving up, like the 4 or 5 beats per minute that they're moving up every week, is really key to them making the slow progress? Like you said earlier, slower is better, or slow is right?
Slower is faster, and it's about accuracy.
Right.
It's about giving their body, yeah, it's exactly right. It's about giving their body more repetitions, tricking their mind into realizing that the repetitions are what's important, and the correct repetition. Speed will come later. And what I've had some students do is they say that, they've practiced at 80, they practice at 84, then they practice by week 3, they get a little bit bored and they're like, well, I can go faster. And they start to go 108, and then they start to introduce a mistake or two. And you just have to trust that process, that over a short period of time, if you're patient, not only will you increase the speed, but the accuracy will go along with it.
I like that. Going slowly. When we start to go too fast, you're right. The mistakes start coming in.
And you can do this with etudes. If your etude is 132, and you can start on day 1 at 80, and then you can go to 84, and then you can go to 88, and so on. And just the metronome helps to control your speed and make sure that you're doing the same thing every day. Okay,
That's right.
let's slide to the next one here. This is just a bigger version if you want to look at that.
Okay.
But, okay, tools.
Okay.
Let's go to the next slide.
Okay.
Tools, a couple things. Fundamentals. All teachers have fundamentals for their students, different exercises for every instrument. And I almost start every practice session with some sort of fundamental routine. And I suspect you have one of those too. You either go through your scales or your long tones or whatever it is, your warm up if you're a vocalist. Whatever it is. Okay, so build that into your practice plan and stick to it every day. The next one is prioritization. And this is a really interesting one that nobody does. And if you do it, it's very, very helpful. So if you're looking at your sheet right now that I asked you to do at the beginning, you already have something prioritized. You have your short-term goal, the thing that you're going to get done today. After you do that today and you're done with your practice session, rather than packing up all your stuff and running out of the room, take a minute and write down 1 or 2 things, maybe 3, that you want to do tomorrow. Just 1 or 2 things, just like I did at the beginning of this session. What do I want to work on today? And you were able to write it down. Everybody could do it. At the end of your practice session today, write down 1 or 2 things that you know you need to work on for tomorrow. And then when you step in the practice room tomorrow and you get ready to practice, you already have your priorities ready to go. And that's really helpful. And it's like takes 30 seconds at the end of your practice session, maybe 60 seconds at the end of your practice session to write a few things down. And then you're motivated. Remember what we talked about at the very beginning. You're motivated to go to the practice room because you already know what you're going to work on. I've got to do this, this, and this. It's really, really helpful. And I like to keep a journal and just list those priorities in my journal. And if my teacher says, well, you know, what did you practice this week? I can open my journal and say, well, on Monday I did this. And on Tuesday I was working on this. And on Thursday, you know, I was working on this. And your teacher goes, wow, no student on the history of the planet has ever done this. This is amazing. And they, you know, and they put some gold stars in your book, and it's really fantastic. So think about that. And then sample practice plans. Let's look at a couple practice plans here. Let's go slide to the next one so you can see what I'm talking. This is a plan. See the plan up there at the top, and then, well, that's not really the way it goes. Let's go to the next slide. So I'm a triathlete, and I was getting ready to train for an Ironman. Anybody know what that is?
Nope.
First, you swim 2.4 miles, which took me about just a little over an hour. And then you go for a 112-mile bike ride. That took me a little over 6 hours, 6.5 hours. And then when you're all done with that, you run a marathon, which is, 26.2 miles. So it took me 12 hours and 43 minutes to do my first Ironman. And I didn't have a clue how to train for that. I mean, I'm a music teacher. What do I know about running, biking, and swimming? I didn't know anything. So I contacted a coach. Remember what I said about athletes and high performers? They need a coach. They need an expert that develops a plan for them. And this is what my coach sent me. Maybe you can scroll to the next slide. I think it's a bit bigger. Yep.
Oh, there we go.
And you can see there on Monday, I was going to swim, and it tells me how long I was going to do it and what my workout was. And then on Tuesday, I was going to run for 40 minutes. L1 is my pace. That doesn't matter. I was going to do sprints, uphill parts, and L1 and kind of relax on the downhills. And then on Wednesday, I was going to lift weights, and I was going to go for an hour and 30-minute bike ride over a rolling course. On Thursday, I was going to swim and I was going to run. And what's the point of all this? The point is all I had to do was execute the plan. I didn't have to schedule this. I didn't have to figure it out. I contacted my expert. My expert made a plan. This doesn't usually happen in music. And so we, as the musicians, have to figure out a plan for ourselves, or a training schedule, if you will. Okay, you can slide to the next one. This is just, look, Fridays I got off. Okay, so here's a sample practice plan for one of my college music majors that you could adapt for your own practice. Fundamentals are up there at the top. in terms of like posture and breathing exercises, anything that you normally do for your instrument. And then most of my students go to their scales and they start working on scales. And you see on day one, they're going to do 2 times at the 8th note, 88. Then they're going to do them 3 times, 88, 92, 90, 92. And they just practice their scales differently rather than starting at the beginning, going to the top, going back down, doing the Grand Master scale, whatever you're working on, they do it differently. They change speeds. Sometimes they do it twice. Sometimes they do it 3 times. It's just different every day, and that makes it interesting. Then they're going to go to their technical etude, and they're going to do just notes. Then one day they're going to do rhythms, then they're going to do chunk it, then they're going to do puzzle pieces. They're going to practice their etude in a bunch of different ways rather than just starting at the beginning and playing until you make a mistake, and then starting again at the beginning and playing until you make a mistake, right? This sounds familiar, doesn't it? And maybe work on the spot where you made a mistake, then you go back to the beginning and you play until you make, right? This looks way more fun to do puzzle pieces one day and record yourself one day, and it just makes it more interesting. And then some ensemble music. Most of my students play in the band or orchestra, so they can work on their ensemble music, maybe a solo that they're working on, and then alternative practice. And this one was one I came up with. My kids, their band teacher, when they were in middle school, was taking down his Christmas lights off of his house and fell off a ladder and sadly broke his hip. And he was out of school for 8 weeks. It was awful. And my kids were coming home, and all of a sudden they weren't interested in practicing anymore, and they weren't working on their band music. And my wife finally said, "Hey, why don't you do something? You know something about this practice stuff. Why don't you do something?" And so I made little plans for them. And I said, you know what, if you execute this plan, then at the end, alternative practice, you can play, I'll buy you like Disney hits or pop music songs or whatever you want to play, you can play at the end. And they loved it. They absolutely loved it. And each week they came back and asked for more practice plans from me. And I made practice plans, and their reward, rather than going to get a cookie like I might, or going outside, they got to play out of the Disney's greatest hits or whatever they wanted to do for fun. And that was a really good way to motivate them. And then they did a little reflection at the end. They wrote their priorities down at the end, things they were going to work on for the next day. Okay. Keep sliding.
You know what, David? You know what I like about this so much is that, especially now where there's where some kids are not in school, or they're not in regular, they're not having the motivation that they had to prepare for a particular rehearsal. I like this because it mixes up and it keeps your practice entertaining and unique, right?
Yep. Every day is a little bit different, and yet there's a routine to it, isn't there? And you'll notice that there's no time. There's no time associated with any of this. If it takes you 10 minutes to do scales, fine. If it takes you 2 minutes to do scales, fine. That's not what's important. So
I like it.
Good.
I like that. Oh, here we go.
Close up. It's just a close up of the other ones so that you can see it a little better. Okay, so some takeaways for today. As you start to, I'm sure you're motivated now to go practice, right? Time is the enemy. So it's not so much about how much time you put in, but what you actually accomplish. And that may be counter to what your teacher may say. So I don't want to necessarily go against what your teacher says, but how can you use that time very effectively? That's what I'm getting at. Small goals for today and the week. That's what you need to focus on. Making something, what am I going to do today? What am I going to do tomorrow? What am I hoping to accomplish this week? And maybe after the whole week is done, and if I've practiced every day, then I definitely get that chocolate chip cookie. Make a practice plan for yourself. Give it a try. Make a little spreadsheet and list down the 2 or 3 or 4 things that you want to practice. And then make one at the end of your reflection time, make one for tomorrow and one for the next day, and so on, because that's how you become an expert practicer. And then in your journals, I highly recommend that you set some priorities for yourself and for your practice before you just sit down and start playing at the beginning. Sit down and take a second and say, what am I hoping to get done today? And you will feel a wonderful sense of accomplishment when that's all done. Okay. Now I've gone plenty of time here. I think success is a journey. Getting to the end is it's not about the destination. It's about doing it. That's what's important. It's more important than the outcome. So
I like that.
And then these are just some of my books that I've written. So, okay, fire some questions at me.
Okay. I have a few, but I want to wait till and see what everyone else has. Anyone have a question right away?
Yeah, I have one.
Okay.
The whole concept about stopping when you make a mistake, I think it's great, but how do you, when you're dealing with beginners and, you know, they're just learning and there's lots of mistakes, what would you say in that instance? You know, because, you know, there's just so many mistakes when you're starting until you get to a certain level. And so your thoughts for that
Yes.
stage
Well,
of development?
watching, yes, well, I started beginners as instrumentalists, and of course my own 4 children starting on piano. I know exactly where you're coming from. And my answer to that is, number one, they have to go slow. Most of the mistakes are happening because they're going too fast.
Okay.
Number one. And convincing a 6-year-old or a 7-year-old to go slow is really, really hard. So sometimes I'll change the rhythm from quarter notes to eighth notes, but that gets confusing. So it's just easier to tap the beat, have a metronome going with some divisions. You as their teacher can do some sort of padding, potentially playing some chords, making it an interesting background for them. The method books for instrumentalists often come with accompaniment CDs that you can slow down or go faster. But for me, it's about tempo and trying to prevent them from making those mistakes. Are they going to happen? Yes, they're going to happen. And there are ways to break down the playing. For instance, before they even play, can they say all the names of the notes? Can they sing it in time? Can they actually kinesthetically play? Because being able to say them and then kinesthetically being able to play them are 2 totally different skills that we're trying to incorporate at the same time. And many of those mistakes are happening as a result of that. And so breaking it down and saying, okay, my 7-year-old piano student, first you need to tap the rhythm and tap it correctly. Then you need to say the names of the notes out of time. Then we're going to say the names of the notes in time. Then we're going to say, you know, and then we're finally going to play it on the piano, for instance, rather than saying, okay, you have to know the names of the notes, the rhythms, and you have to do it perfectly with every finger go. Well, of course, they're going to make mistakes, right? Because that's too many things.
So break it down.
Yep, break it down.
Wow. Yeah, I like that. Breaking it down into, I use that technique with handbell choirs I've had over the years. You know, we clap, we count, we do everything, and then we ring on one bell, and then we finally play our own parts, because you've got to take away you got to learn it in layers, right?
Yep. Yep.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
it seems simple to us, particularly those beginning pieces. Look, why can't you get it right? You know, and it takes a minute. Good question. Next one. Anybody?
Very good question. Next question.
I know you had mentioned that when you make a mistake, it's kind of like a different way that your brain is learning to play the piece. So how can you correct that once your brain has kind of learned that way? Would it be repeating the correct way?
Yes. So first of all, try your best to go slower so that you don't start to learn that mistake. And as soon as the mistake happens, then stop and program it out of your brain. Do it slow down and do it correctly 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 times. Challenge yourself. How many times? I have another technique in the book. How many times? World record is what it's called. How many times can I repeat this measure before I make that same mistake again? And you keep challenging yourself. Well, I just did it 4 times. Now I'm going to try to do it 5. Now I'm going to try to do it 6. And then you can slowly speed the tempo back up. But that's how you extinguish that mistake, so that it doesn't happen. If you do it 12 times correctly and only 1 time wrong, now your chances of doing it right are much, much better.
Any other questions?
We have some questions in the chat.
Oh, let me look here. Okay, do you think warm-ups are necessary?
Yes, and it depends what the instrument is. Certainly as an instrumentalist, there are long tones and breathing exercises and things that I recommend. For a vocalist, warming up the instrument is extremely important. I've seen pianists do stretching exercises to make sure their hands are ready to go. But I think warm-ups are really important. And I tend to call them skill sessions in the instrumental world because a warm-up sort of implies that we're not doing any learning yet. And I think there is learning happening in those warm-ups. So for what that's worth. Like, how often should an
you?
player be using a metronome? Well, I think a metronome is critical. And if you're going to build a house, you're going to use a hammer and a screwdriver and a saw, and you're going to use all these tools. And then once the house is built, all those tools are just sort of sitting in the garage until you need to hang a picture or something. I think part of building a piece of music and getting ready to perform it is using these tools. And a metronome is just a tool. And using that tool often until the musical house is built, I think is really important. Then once the house is built, you can check in with your metronome every once in a while. But using a metronome keeps me honest. It keeps me from going too fast too quickly.
I like that, because that's the enemy, right? Keeping it slow as long as possible, and then the speed will come. Right?
Yep, it really will. I promise. Try it
It
sometime.
does.
It really does. It really does. But I can't convince people of that. So
I love what you said earlier. You said you got to trust the process. And that's one of those times where that's a perfect thing to say, because it is. I mean, the longer you keep it slow, the faster you'll be able to get the tempo will come.
Yep.
I guess an observation may be helpful to some, but there's so many techniques in there. There's, being a lot of us are homeschooled or homeschool moms, and we learn to get attuned to how our kids learn. And I noticed you have a lot of things in there that are great for visual learners, auditory learners. And you know what, maybe how you've been practicing is possibly not the way that your child or you learned the quickest or the best. And I think the metronome, of course, goes without saying no matter what, but you have so many great ideas that you can mix up and make it interesting every day. And I love the variety. And there may be some in here that you catch on to and say, this is a real keeper for me. I love this, and you go back to it more often. But yeah.
And there may be some that you don't like at all, but I highly recommend that you try them. There's 30 of them. You can mix it up every day and try something new. And
that's true. Anyone else have a question? I have one more, but I just want to give everyone a chance.
I could ask it.
It's okay. Oh.
Logan, do you have a question?
Well, I was kind of wondering, I really like that stair stepper chart, and so his piano teacher wants him to practice his scales in all the rhythms. So quarter, eighth, 16th.
Yep.
Am I forgetting one?
Quarter, 8, 16.
I think that's it.
Broken rhythms, right?
He knows it. I just supervise, try to figure it out and do my best to help him. Anyway, with that stair stepper, would you suggest that, like, for example, on day 1 with the 80, the metronome at 80, can I put the can I put the 8th notes at 40 and keep that same rhythm and do it that way? And then, in other words, do the math, because I can figure that out, to give him the practice with the other rhythms.
Yes. That would work very, very well. What's important is the starting tempo needs to be a tempo that he is very, very comfortable playing it correctly from beginning to end. So slow enough that it's correct. And then if it gets too slow, sometimes it's good to have a subdivision in there. So if the tempo is 1, 2, that's too slow. It needs, so then you can add that little click in there, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and bum, 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 something like that. And then when they go to triplets, triplet, 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 something, and you can change the tempo around. But if it gets too slow and you can't feel that pulse, that's where you may need a subdivision in there. But find that starting tempo where he's really comfortable, and then start to build from there.
Good question.
Yep.
Anyone else? I have a question too, is that and everybody has heard this. As a matter of fact, you know, I'm a flutist. My teacher in college had a border around his you know, his room, and it said all the way around his whole room. I know it sounded better in the practice room.
Yeah.
So what would be your advice and some of your techniques to say when you go from your practice room into a lesson or performance, when all at once there's a little more anxiety and you start to have mistakes you didn't have before, and they pop up seemingly out of nowhere?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things that happen there, and that's a great question. The performance anxiety, if you will, if you want to call it that, or just feeling the butterflies or things, that's where for some reason your brain starts to think about all of the ways in which you can get to the grocery store, all of the ways in which you can play the D major scale, and it seems to scramble them. And so part of it is trusting the process and trusting your kinesthetic memory to come through in those moments. And honestly,
how do you define kinesthetic?
Kinesthetic meaning your motor function, like your fingers and your lips, if you're a flute player or a brass player, or things that you have done through repetition. For instance, when LeBron James is standing on the free throw line during the NBA championship, his body is going through that process that he has done thousands and thousands and thousands of times. He's not thinking about, oh, I need to make sure my wrist flexes at the top, or whatever. It's so much repetition that he doesn't think about it. And I think that's where we need to be as performers when you're walking in. And a lesson's not fair. A lesson is happening every week, and you don't have enough time to train that kinesthetic memory, those fingers, in 1 week. It's going to happen over 2 or 3 or 4 weeks or months. And so when you get into that audition situation or that performance situation, hopefully you've built those skills over time, like the stair stepper, and you've done so much repetition that your body simply takes over. And it does happen. And athletes often call it playing in the zone, and they get into a place where they're not thinking about the D major scale. They're not thinking about articulations. They're not thinking about free throws. They're just playing. And that is a beautiful place to be. And I think when you can train yourself over time to get to a place where you can play, quote, in the zone, and not every performance gets that. I'll be honest, you don't always get there. But I find that if you're prepared and you have done the work, then you just do your best and everything will take care of itself. Most people, I think, get concerned when they're not sure they've done enough work, and they're not sure they've done enough repetition, and they're not sure, and that leads to more anxiety, I think. Does that answer your question?
It does. It
Good.
does.
Good.
Putting yourself in the zone, remembering what was going through your mind when you were practicing, the mindset that you had, recreating it, right? So that
Yep.
you're in that same place.
Yep. And this is
It's
just my
amazing.
practice room. It's just my practice room. It's not my teacher's studio. It's not the audition. It's not I'm just going to go play this, and I promise you, to leave it on this thought, nothing magical ever happens in the performance. It's always going to be exactly the way it was. And so, I waited for years during my career for something magic to happen during the performance, because I just thought this was like, and that never happens. So, so every once in a while you get lucky, but that's not the magic I'm talking about. So anyway.
I understand.
Yep.
But I really encourage you all to go out and get this book. You will have it highlighted and you'll have the pages turned down on different places. And you're going to want to keep it right near your piano so you can make make yourself a great plan. So next week we have basically taking just one technique and made a flow chart with it. And then we're going into creating artistry from the week after that.
Thank you for joining us today. We hope you'll be with us again next Monday at 4 p.m. for our next online Zoom class.